Hello and welcome to this now and next webinar, which we're running from Square Pattern Boggs, looking at recent election results and the implications for business. My name is Matthew Kirk. I'm International Affairs Advisor at Square Pattern Boggs, coming to you from London, and I'm delighted to be joined by my colleagues Christina Economides, who is in Brussels, and Thomas Delisle, who spends part of his time in Brussels and part in Paris. We're going to look very quickly at the results of the elections and at the implications of them. We're planning more of these webinars running through the autumn, looking at specific policy areas. So without more ado, let me turn to my colleagues. This is obviously the year of elections around the world. And we've seen just a month or so ago the European Parliament elections, and in the last few days elections in the UK and in France. And all of those have important implications for the environment in which business will operate in the forthcoming years. Very quick commentary before I turn to Christina and Thomas on the French and European Parliament elections. Very quick commentary on the UK elections. These have produced results which are historic in their proportions, both in terms of the reduction of the former governing Conservative Party to just 121 seats in the Parliament, and a very large majority for the incoming Labour government, which is already fully in office. The new Prime Minister took office at lunchtime on Friday and is today in Washington at the NATO summit. While it's an election which has produced a historic result in political terms, it's probably produced a less historic result in policy terms, in that if you look at many of the key areas of policy, whether it's foreign policy and defense, or economic and fiscal policy, there isn't that huge a difference between the outgoing government and the incoming government. What probably is the biggest difference in the UK is that we are moving from a period of comparative instability, with quite frequent changes of Prime Minister and a great deal of turmoil within the governing Conservative Party, to what looks set up to be at least a period of relative stability, with a Labour government with a very large majority seeing itself as having a very clear policy mandate. It is, however, worth noting that that very large majority is not underpinned by a very large share of the vote. Indeed, this is a historically small share of the vote for an incoming governing party. So if the UK is moving from a period of instability within the governing party to, if all goes well, a period of stability in government forthcoming. Thomas, you have just had elections in France. Would you like quickly to give us a view of the outcome of those?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matthew. I think the situation in France quite mirrors the development in Great Britain. In that we are exiting a situation of 7 years of political stability and economic growth as well, into a period of so far political uncertainty, which may well lead to instability in the short or medium term. We had those anticipated legislative elections last weekend. All observers were expecting a victory from the populist nationalist party Rassemblement National, led by Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella, who was running for Prime Minister. All other political parties built some more or less structured coalitions to resist the push of the Rassemblement National. The center bloc and the left bloc also agreed on withdrawing some of their candidates in situations where the Rassemblement National could have a win. And this worked better than expected. And even quite surprisingly, the left coalition, Nouveau Front Populaire, uniting Greens, socialists, and the French Communist Party and the left populist France Insoumise into a left coalition that won with a very short majority. With that, we are now entering a very unexpected and new situation for the French Fifth Republic, where the President Macron is weakened by the elections. And in the meantime, we don't have any clear majority on which to build a government for a cohabitation with Emmanuel Macron. The coming weeks will be very important to see the extent to which the left coalition could stand and form any sort of a government, or if the center bloc will be succeeding in uniting the center right and the center left into some sort of softer cohabitation.
And Thomas, thank you. And I mentioned in the UK that there was a disparity between the size of majority Labour has achieved and their share of the vote. And share of the vote is often an indicator of the underlying politics. Can you just say a very quick word about how the shape of the Assemblée Nationale and the share of vote looks in France? Does it broadly map on, or is there a significant difference there?
What is interesting to note is that ultimately voters, like around 35% of voters have voted for Rassemblement National. But on the top of that, the two other thirds have voted against Rassemblement National. And we now have three blocks with more or less the same numbers of representatives, which give I think a fair representation of the political situation in France. But ultimately, the French system, without this withdrawing of candidates in some situation, should have seen the Rassemblement National obtaining a majority. So there is clearly, for the 1/3 of the French voters that voted for the Rassemblement National, a feeling that somehow the system was, if not to say circumvented, but at least that the other parties made all what they could to resist to Rassemblement National acceding to power. And this will certainly create some ressentiment from those voters in the future.
Thank you very much. And Christina, no such effect in the European Parliament, where the elections are directly proportionate. And obviously those elections have now happened a few weeks ago. Where are we now in terms of formation of party groupings and so forth? How's the Parliament looking?
Thank you, Matthew. So indeed, the outcome of the EU elections, where we are seeing that there has been a big shift towards the extreme and populist right, with a lot of countries that have a big representation there. The largest political party, so the center-right European People's Party, remains the biggest party at the European Parliament, as well as the Socialist Party. But at the same time, we have seen that there's been a big change and loss of seats for the Green and the Liberal Party. At the moment, actually earlier this week, there was the new formation of a political party after the outcome of the French elections that is led by Orban's Fidesz and by Le Pen's Rassemblement National. That's the group that is called Patriots of Europe, a new group that has been just formed with a new president, Jordan Bardella. That actually combines a number of political parties that were also previously within the European Conservative Party. And so now we're seeing that there's going to be a lot of new dynamics in the new parliament, with a bigger a presence of the populist right, with actually the new creation of the group making it the third largest political group in the European Parliament. So that will create a lot of implications also for business to decide whether they would need to engage with some of this party being the third largest party in the Parliament, and also, of course, with respect to the coalitions that will be created within the European Parliament, and how the different parties will be willing to negotiate and form compromises on their own.
And thank you, Christina. One of the key requirements of the newly elected parliament is to take a decision on the proposals that the European Council, the heads of state and government, have made for key appointments. We're expecting that, I think, in the next week or two. How's that looking? And particularly, there are a lot of stories about President von der Leyen, who has been renominated as president of the Commission, having to work quite hard to make sure that she secures a majority for her appointment.
Absolutely. So at the moment, so next week will be the first European Parliament plenary. So where, first of all, we'll have to appoint the new European Parliament president. So that we expect to be the same as the last mandate, so Roberta Metsola. And later on, so we expect on the 18th of July to have indeed the election of, or the appointment and approval of the Commission President von der Leyen. At the moment, there is, she will require to have 361 votes. That will be a simple majority in Parliament. It's interesting to see how the political groups will be positioned in this respect. Some of them, also from her own European People's Party, may not be that convinced about her because of some of the statements she had made previously. So at the moment, we have to see equally how the ECR groups, the conservative group, led by not led, but like including the MEPs from Meloni. How would they be positioned? And the reason is that they have been, the Italian Prime Minister has been very have abstained for her appointment of von der Leyen in the last appointment, and so at the moment we have to see how the dynamics are done and what the promises will be that von der Leyen gives to the political groups. Also bearing in mind that one of the largest agendas of the European Commission is with respect to the European Green Deal, and how would the new Commission, which will be the ambitions of the new Commission in this respect, because it's a priority for a lot of the political groups.
So already, Christina, we can see that the policy priorities, and I wanted to turn now to policy areas, the policy priorities that the Commission might want to put forward are already in an area of political contention, if you like. So during the last Parliament, the priorities were very clear: COVID recovery, the Green New Deal, and digital Europe. Can we look forward to the same again, or has the shift that you've described maybe put some nuances within that?
I would say that these will still remain key priorities for the next European Commission and the next political mandate. We, according to the strategic agenda that was approved a couple of weeks ago by the EU heads of state and government, there are three main themes that will be dominating the policy agenda going forward. That will be free democratic Europe. That basically will be outlining the EU's ability to abide by the rule of law, the freedom of speech, etc. Stronger and secure Europe. So one of the new priorities of the Commission will actually be, next to the resilience and the robust prosperity of Europe, is to include also a higher focus on security and defense, including from a spending and investment perspective. So that's going to be one key new policy area that will be the European Commission will be focusing on. And of course, the prosperity and the competitiveness of Europe being the third theme, where the Commission is going to look into securing more supply chains for the European Union, the capacity, new technologies, the semiconductor, artificial intelligence, for example, are key themes. The net zero technologies, and of course, two of the main priorities that will be continuing from the previous Commission, that will be the twin transition on green and digital. It remains to be seen, of course, how ambitious the Commission will be in these two themes, particularly on the green perspective, provided that there's been a lot of bonanza of green legislations that industry and member states alike seems to be a little bit concerned on how we're going to move into implementation with all the new legislative and compliance requirements that they will be having.
Thank you, Christina. And Thomas, obviously, as you said, it's too soon to look at what a new French government's priorities are. There isn't a government yet. But when you look at what you described about the voting outcome and so forth, are there any clues within that from how people voted as to how the policy priorities that Christina outlined are likely to command support from whoever emerges as a majority in the new French Parliament, how that opinion reflects through into policy?
So you're correct. It's first very difficult to know what the government will look like and then what it will do. Because so we've seen a high-speed campaign of 4 weeks for all parties to organize for those elections. It was a very French-centric campaign where parties really focused on some easy topics, no need for complex developments, etc. 3 main topics, I would say: security, immigration, and the very French concept of purchasing power. So in other words, how to mitigate the consequences of the past year's inflation. Parties had very different ways of addressing those three topics. With now the Rassemblement National being out of the picture, the left majority and the center bloc having very different ways of addressing those topics. France is not used to building large governing coalitions, and it is not used under the Fifth Republic to work on consensus. Therefore, because we have no clear majority within the Assembly, there will be a need for the government to build coalitions beyond its own bloc. It's what Macron tried to do in the previous legislature, building more with the center-right. But now having, for example, the new Front Populaire, the Nouveau Front Populaire, somehow led by extreme left, it will be very difficult for them to gain any allies within the center bloc. If no such project coalition is emerging, there will be political instability at some point that electors or voters may well sanction later on. What will be interesting to look at is that if we look so far at the program of the leftist coalition, most of what they have in mind, such as increasing minimum wages, abolishing the pension reforms that Macron passed through in a very difficult political momentum, it's clearly questioning a lot of the economic stability of France, and at some point could also be challenging some important principles of EU law and challenging Brussels at some point. So let's see what comes out of that. We are just after a very, very intense campaign. There is no need to structure an assembly, possibly a government, and from there to see if there is not a more nuanced version of a left program for the Nouveau Front Populaire to govern in France.
And some very hard choices coming up if whoever is in government is to be able to produce a budget which will meet the European criteria and avoid the risk of the excessive deficits procedure, which I think could be one of the key early decisions for the new Commission. A quick comment from me on UK policy priorities. Thomas, you mentioned purchasing power in France. In the UK, that's cost of living, essentially the same dynamic. The inflation driven by the rise in energy prices has put a lot of pressure on household budgets, and that was one of the key drivers of the election, undoubtedly. I'd say the new government's first priority is to get the economy growing better, and to try to shift the trend rate of growth back up again. And it's looking at a number of regulatory and policy reforms to achieve that. In defense, security, foreign policy, as I said, not much change there. Broad continuity over Ukraine, over the need to spend more on defense and so forth. But Thomas, you mentioned immigration, and I think immigration has been a key driver in the UK as much as in France. And I think this is one of the major challenges, both for national governments and for the European institutions going forward. It's a driver of more populist politics in virtually every country. I'm going to turn back to Christina now and ask a question which I think many of our audience in the UK will be interested in, which is the new, one of the other priorities of the new UK government is what they've described as a reset in the relationship with the EU, not a major renegotiation. I don't think anyone has any appetite for that, but trying to take steps which would ease areas of friction in trade and strengthen the links between London and Brussels and key EU capitals. To what extent, Christina, do you think there is any appetite in the EU to move beyond the bitterness and difficulty of the Brexit years and try to establish a better working relationship with the UK?
Thank you, Matthew. I think, well, there's definitely no appetite to reopen all type of negotiation. I think that's clear on both ends. But at the same time, I think that the European Union leaders have been very, have welcomed the outcome of the UK elections, and they seem to be quite open to engage into discussions with the new UK government. Especially from a post-Brexit trading relationship, I think we have seen over the last years how turbulent the relationships have been and how they have really tried to find solutions despite the difficulties that were seen. So at the moment, a new UK government is providing with new opportunities to engage and to find solutions. So it's, for the time being, the European Union seems to be very open to have discussions with the new government in the UK and to establish whether there could be some improvements in the existing regime, with the caveat, of course, that this will be rather limited on the broader scheme of things, but then really focusing on how to improve some of the existing bottlenecks with respect to the post-Brexit trading relationships.
Thank you, Christina. So some hope for businesses who do business across the channel in both directions of perhaps some improvements there and some easing of trade friction. And Thomas, I wanted to ask you, France has traditionally had a hugely important role in terms of European defense and security, very much a leading role there, one of the two European nuclear powers, but also a very important traditional leadership role, very much in partnership with Germany within the EU. And I note that the German government is in a relatively weak position at the moment as well. How do you see the outcome of the election affecting both of those traditional positions of strength that France has occupied in European matters?
It's a very, very good question. In particular, in light of the fact that President Macron has been very active in the past years on rebuilding France's political leadership in terms of being a force of proposal within the EU, including more recently on defense and security. But his power is somehow now weakened by the result of the elections. And any sort of a cohabitation with a prime minister from another party would mean and imply some negotiations between the president and the prime minister on who is to take the leadership on those topics, especially on EU policies. And it will very much depend on the Prime Minister. If we, for example, take the example, also pretty unlikely right now, of Mr. Mélenchon taking the role of Prime Minister, we would be talking about a very different EU policy, and we would be talking about a real battle between the President and the Prime Minister. But let's call it a worst case scenario in terms of the intensity of the negotiations that will need to be held between the President and the Prime Minister. But I think that given the current situation of no clear majority within the Assembly, it's somehow likely that we could get not a weak Prime Minister, but in any case, a Prime Minister that would not be too exposed on every topic from a political standpoint. So there could still be some room for maneuver for President Macron on those topics, but that's like time will tell. And we are certainly entering again a phase of uncertainty during which things will need to be organized to see how President Macron and its very pro-European policy will survive those elections.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So a time of change, undoubtedly, change, incremental change within the EU and possibly more significant change in France and certainly change of political complexion in the UK. We were trying to keep this webinar to half an hour. We're coming up towards the half hour. So I wanted to ask perhaps Christina first and then Thomas, and then I'll wrap up, for any final quick thoughts, key takeaways that businesses who are listening to this webinar, watching this webinar, should consider. Christina.
Thank you, Matthew. I think what is important is now to see from the European Parliament perspective is for companies to really start reflecting about the possibility to engage with the populist right and whether there is an appetite to do that. Of course, it will be very key to also see how the European Parliament will react to the new coalitions that will be created in there. This will be critical to determine the direction of travel and the compromises that will be conducted in the future for all policy formation and legislations to come. I think the other key consideration is to see what will happen next week when it comes to the appointment of Ursula von der Leyen, because that will also determine that will be critical for the next 5 years for the development of new policies, the implementation and the ambition of the European Union with respect to new policy priorities. Whether we will have continuity with the approval of von der Leyen, or if we continue with if we will need to have a new Commission president.
Thank you, Christina. Thomas, key takeaways for business from Paris.
France has been the first EU member state for foreign investments in the past years. Let's see what consequences the elections will have on that fact. And in particular, it will be very important to monitor what signals a left coalition would send to business if they can build a government, because we may well be exiting a very pro-business government in France to a more state-centric government if the left coalition can build a government.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And from the UK perspective, I think my key takeaways would be, as I said, broad continuity in the overall policy framework. But the thing to look out for is that the Labour Party is ambitious after 14 years of opposition to make a difference. The UK budget position looks extremely tight. There is not a lot of spare money, and tax is for the UK at a historically high level. So less chance to raise taxes to cover any ambitious new plans on the part of the Labour Party. So I think that balance between how you stimulate growth and how you keep taxes under control is a key lookout for business. Probably some important new areas of regulation in the labour and employment field and social field as well. As I said at the outset, this is the first of a series we're planning to run through the autumn, in which we will pick up on key policy themes and explore those with experts from Square Pattern Boggs and invited guests as we go through the autumn and look at the new political landscape in Europe. We intend also to look at how Europe should read across the Atlantic to the very important developments that we will see towards the end of the year in the US presidential elections. So thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you for giving us your time. We hope you found this interesting. If you have specific questions or specific issues you'd like to raise, do please contact us. We would be delighted to pick those up. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.